a quiet coder, a nosy neighbor, and a Wi-Fi password that blew the lid off an entire neighborhood. Miles Bennett just wanted to reset his router. Instead, he found himself surrounded by cops, accused of suspicious activity by none other than HOA Karen. Yes, that Karen. But when officers looked deeper into his network, what they uncovered was far more disturbing than a neighbor's paranoia. Someone wasn't just stealing internet, they were hijacking home security cameras, watching families, listening, recording. And the creepiest part? The data wasn't being sent across the country, it was being routed from a house just down the street. What started as a misunderstanding turned into a full-blown felony investigation. The man everyone feared turned out to be the hero. And the person they trusted most? The real threat hiding in plain sight. This is more than a story about Wi-Fi. It's about bias, betrayal, and what happens when surveillance goes way too far. If you love stories with twists, justice, and just the right amount of neighborhood chaos, hit that subscribe button and support Real HOA Drama, because out here, the cul-de-sac is never as quiet as it seems. Miles Bennett wasn't trying to be mysterious. He just liked the quiet. Every morning, he brewed a single cup of Ethiopian roast, fed his cat, who responded to the name Linux only when it suited her, and settled in at his desk by 8 a.m. on the dot. His life was a neat string of routines, clean code, and blessed silence. No neighborhood barbecues, no fantasy football leagues, no awkward small talk about lawn fertilizer. Just him, a high-speed connection, and a job that didn't require him to wear real pants. He lived in a quaint suburb called Willow Creek, the kind of place where mailboxes were shaped like lighthouses and people named their Wi-Fi routers after their dogs. It was quiet, picturesque, and for the most part, a good fit. At least it had been. Until Karen Foster moved in across the street. Karen was alert. That's the nicest way Miles could put it. She was the type of woman who noticed if your recycling bin was facing the wrong direction, or if your porch light flickered one too many times at night. She had binoculars by her kitchen window and a clipboard for noting irregularities. Officially, she was the HOA's neighborhood safety liaison. Unofficially, she was the reason some folks only took out their trash at midnight. To be fair, Karen wasn't evil. She didn't clutch her purse tighter when she saw Miles, didn't whisper his name like a curse at HOA meetings. Her brand of vigilance didn't come from hatred, it came from fear. 3 years ago, Karen's previous home had been broken into while she was away visiting her sister in Florida. The burglars ransacked her house, stole family heirlooms, and left behind an eerie message scrawled on the mirror. You should have stayed home. Since then, she'd vowed never to be caught off guard again. She moved to Willow Creek to reset, but the trauma came with her, tucked inside her like a second skin. And so, when Karen looked at Miles, young, reclusive, headphones always on, she didn't see danger. But she didn't see safety either. She saw the unknown, and to her, that was enough to raise an eyebrow or a phone to 911. Miles knew all of this, though not in so many words. He saw the way Karen paused at her mailbox when he was outside, how her gaze lingered just a second too long. He wasn't mad. He wasn't even surprised. He'd lived in enough zip codes to recognize the subtle signs of polite paranoia. Still, he liked his peace. He liked that no one knocked on his door asking to borrow a ladder or join a church fundraiser. He liked being invisible. But invisibility has a price. Because when you live on the edges of a community, when you choose not to join the potlucks or Facebook groups, you become other. And other, in the wrong circumstances, can quickly become suspect. So Miles stayed quiet. He kept his lawn trimmed to HOA standards, his music low, his comings and goings predictable. He even waved at Karen once, just to see what would happen. She blinked, startled, then offered the stiffest half-smile he'd ever seen. It was a start. Or maybe just a misfire. Either way, life went on. Until one afternoon, a flickering Wi-Fi signal set off a chain of events that would unravel every illusion of safety in Willow Creek. And suddenly, the quiet coder wasn't invisible anymore. He was the eye of a storm no one saw coming. Miles Bennett didn't spook easily. After all, he spent most of his days hunting bugs through thousands of lines of code. Glitches were part of the job. Ghosts, not so much. So when his Spotify started hiccuping during his work playlist, cutting out mid-beat like someone was playing DJ roulette, he figured it was just one of those random ISP hiccups. A few dropped frames, a sluggish download speed. No big deal. Right? Wrong. Because then Zoom betrayed him. Midway through a call with a very serious client who wore very tiny glasses, Miles's face froze on screen in the least flattering pose imaginable. Eyebrows mid-arch, mouth slightly open, looking like he was trying to remember if he left the stove on. Miles, the client asked, voice distorted. Miles blinked. Sorry, Wi-Fi's been a little weird lately. The man narrowed his eyes. You're a software engineer, aren't you? As if that meant he controlled the internet. Miles smiled, muted himself, and made a mental note. Check the damn network. Later that day, he plopped down at the dining table with his laptop and a mug of lukewarm coffee. He logged into his router's admin panel, something 99% of his neighbors probably didn't even know existed, and started combing through the device list.
Phone. Check.
Laptop.
Check.
Smart TV.
Check. Then he saw it.
Willow Creek, I-01. Not a string of random letters or gibberish like most factory-named devices.
No.
This one was custom-named. Intentionally. Like someone wanted it to blend in with the neighborhood. His stomach shifted. He clicked on the MAC address. Still active. Still connected. Bandwidth usage, high. This wasn't just someone tapping into his Netflix. This was someone camping out on his network. Miles leaned back, frowning. He hadn't shared his Wi-Fi password with anyone. No guests. No deliveries. No neighbor kids borrowing a signal. And this wasn't a mistake. This was personal. Someone was on his network. Someone who knew what they were doing. Now, Miles had always considered himself a man of logic. He didn't jump to conclusions. He didn't believe in haunted routers or sentient toasters. But as he stared at that unfamiliar device name pulsing on his screen, something cold settled in his gut. Because if someone had slipped past his password, it meant they had cracked into his world. Not just his internet, but his security cams, his smart door lock, even his thermostat. A hacker? A prank? A neighbor with too much free time and just enough knowledge to be dangerous? He wasn't sure yet. But what he was sure of was this. Someone had tapped into his life, and they were watching from the digital shadows. Miles cracked his knuckles, eyes narrowing. If they wanted to play games, he'd play back. But he wasn't just going to change his password. He was going to kick them off and lock the damn door. As his fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in a new, brutal passphrase only a caffeine-addled programmer could remember, he couldn't help but smirk. Whoever this mystery leech was, they'd picked the wrong guy to mess with. But what Miles didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that this wasn't just some bored techie hijacking Wi-Fi for free HBO. This was the beginning of something far darker. Something watching. Listening.
Learning.
And the name Willow Creek, I-01? It wasn't just clever. It was a warning. It was just after 2 p.m. when Miles Bennett stepped into his driveway, phone in hand, brows furrowed in quiet concentration. He wasn't texting. Wasn't scrolling through Instagram. He was deep in his router settings, locking down his network like a digital fortress. Long strings of random characters, WPA3 encryption, MAC address filtering. The works. The signal inside his house had been spotty, so he stepped outside to finish the reset. Routine stuff. Boring even. But from across the street, inside a cream-colored colonial with a wraparound porch and perfectly trimmed hydrangeas, Karen Foster saw something very different. She was at her kitchen sink, rinsing out a mug that said number 1 HOA Hero, a gift she bought for herself, obviously, when her gaze drifted out the window. And there he was. That man. The quiet one. Miles. She narrowed her eyes. He was standing just a little too still, his fingers tapping just a little too fast. His expression unreadable. Suspiciously unreadable if you asked her. Which, to be fair, no one had. But Karen didn't need an invitation. She had instincts. To Karen, The combination of Miles's solitude, technology, and nonchalance triggered a silent alarm in her brain. A man outside, glued to his phone, doing something techy? It felt off, calculated, like he was hacking something, or watching someone, or both. She reached for the cordless phone on the counter, heart rate spiking. "This is how it starts," she muttered. "They always look normal until it's too late." Now, to Karen's credit, she wasn't the type who panicked over a brown leaf or an unfamiliar car. Well, not anymore. Not since that time last year when she reported her own Amazon driver for hovering too long. But today felt different. Today, it was Miles. She had never trusted him. He didn't wave at the block parties. Didn't sign up for the garage sale. Didn't even put up Christmas lights. Just one of those motion sensor projector things that Karen hated with a passion. And now here he was, standing in his driveway, tapping away like he was launching missiles. Or worse, snooping. Karen didn't understand the deep workings of routers or network protocols. But she did understand her gut. And her gut said, "Call someone."
So she did.
911. "What's your emergency?" Karen lowered her voice, like she thought Miles could hear her from across the street through 3 walls and her floral curtains. "Yes, hello. I'm reporting something suspicious." "Suspicious how, ma'am?" "My neighbor. He's outside doing something with his phone. For a long time. Just standing there. Looking around. Typing." A pause. "Is he threatening anyone?" "No, but he's definitely up to something." "I know it." The dispatcher's voice was calm, used to this kind of call. "Ma'am, do you have any reason to believe he's committing a crime?" "I have a reason to believe he's doing something weird," Karen snapped. "And in my experience, weird always leads to dangerous." "Okay, we'll send someone to check it out." Karen hung up and took a deep breath, staring out the window as if she'd just defused a bomb. Across the street, Miles stretched his arms and walked back inside, completely unaware that a patrol car was already on the way. He'd just updated his Wi-Fi password. Karen had just started a chain of events that would unravel her sense of safety, trust, and control. Because what Karen feared most wasn't crime or even chaos. It was not knowing, not understanding. And in a world moving faster than she could keep up, where tech was sorcery and people like Miles were the new gatekeepers, Karen clung to the only power she had left: the phone. And she had just used it to call the cops on the one man who could have saved her. It took the squad car less than 5 minutes to pull up. Willow Creek wasn't exactly a hotbed of crime. The most excitement they'd had in the past year was when someone spray-painted HOA equals tyrants on the clubhouse wall. Karen had that power washed within the hour. Detective Jason Navarro stepped out first, broad-shouldered, late 40s, with the kind of posture that told you he'd seen worse days, but wasn't in the mood for nonsense. Officer Emily Carter followed close behind, lean, composed, and sharp-eyed. Together, they looked like they could handle anything from a hostage negotiation to a cat in a tree. Miles was just heading back into his house when he saw them. He paused, phone still in hand, brows lifting slightly. "Seriously?" Navarro called out, voice calm but firm. "Sir? Can we speak with you a moment?" Miles turned, stepping halfway down the walkway, phone still unlocked in his palm.
"Sure."
"Something wrong." "We got a call about suspicious activity," Carter said. "Said you were out here, doing something with your phone." Miles blinked. "Suspicious activity?" Navarro studied him, not accusing but not dismissing either. "What exactly were you doing out here, sir?" Miles exhaled slowly. "Changing my Wi-Fi password." A long beat passed. "You mind repeating that?" Navarro asked. "I was changing my Wi-Fi password," Miles repeated. "My connection was acting up. I checked my router. Found an unknown device. Stepped outside for better signal. That's it." Just then, a sharp voice cut across the street like a blade. "He's lying." Karen Foster, HOA clipboard in hand, arms folded tight across her chest, was standing on her porch like a judge ready to deliver sentencing. She marched toward the sidewalk like she owned every inch of it. "I've seen him out here before," she said. "Always sneaking around, always looking at his phone like he's..." I don't know, watching us. Miles turned to her, expression a mix of disbelief and exhausted patience. I was checking router logs. Oh, sure, Karen huffed. Is that what the kids are calling it now? Officer Carter raised a brow. Ma'am, do you have any actual evidence that Mr. Bennett is doing something illegal? Karen faltered. Well, no, but I've got a feeling. And those are usually right. Navarro rubbed the bridge of his nose. Ma'am, we can't act based on feelings. Karen glared. Isn't it your job to investigate threats before they happen? Miles looked from Karen to the officers. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered. Sir, Navarro said carefully, can you show us your device? Just to clear this up? Miles hesitated. He knew he didn't have to. He shouldn't have to. But he also knew how this could go if he said no. And it wasn't lost on him that he was a black man standing in a nice neighborhood with 2 cops and a white woman pointing fingers from a porch. He handed over his phone unlocked. Be my guest. Navarro and Carter examined the router settings. Carter nodded. He's telling the truth. Unknown device connected. Looks like he's taking steps to lock it down. Karen looked genuinely stunned, like someone had told her Santa was fake. Wait, so he's not? No, ma'am, Carter said. In fact, it looks like he may be the victim of a network intrusion. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Miles folded his arms. Told you. Navarro handed the phone back, his tone shifting, less skeptical now, more focused. Mr. Bennett, do you have reason to believe someone's been accessing your home network without permission? Miles nodded. And I don't think they're just stealing internet. Navarro's jaw tightened. All right, let's take a deeper look. As the officers followed Miles toward his door, Karen remained frozen on the sidewalk, her foundation cracking, because for the first time in a long time, her instincts had failed her. And the man she tried to protect the neighborhood from might be the only one protecting it at all. Inside Miles's home, everything was spotless, minimalist, orderly, and quiet, just like the man himself. A bookshelf lined with programming books and old sci-fi novels, a muted gray couch, and a single framed photo of his late father stood as the only real decor. Detective Navarro and Officer Carter stepped inside, shoes clacking softly on the hardwood. Karen lingered awkwardly on the porch, arms crossed, the wind tugging at the edges of her judgment. Miles sat at the dining table and mirrored his phone to his laptop screen. Okay, he said, voice even, though a low buzz of tension crept into his tone. Here's the router interface. The screen lit up, showing a list of devices connected to his network. Most were familiar: his laptop, his phone, smart TV, thermostat. And then there it was. Willow Creek, I-01. Still connected. Still drawing data. Navarro leaned in. That's the device? Miles nodded. Been connected for days. I thought it was someone stealing bandwidth, but... He clicked over to the activity logs, columns of data in time-stamped lines that most people wouldn't bother with. But to Miles, it told a story. A dark one. See this? He pointed. That device has been pinging my internal IPs, home security cam feeds. Carter's brows furrowed. You're saying they've been watching your cameras? Yeah, Miles said, his voice flat now, edged with steel. Live access. Whoever this is, they've been seeing everything inside my house. Navarro's eyes narrowed. You have motion alerts or backups? Encrypted cloud logs, Miles replied. But I noticed odd access times, someone logging in during hours I wasn't home. And that's when I saw it wasn't just passive bandwidth theft. He clicked again, pulling up a live stream from his front door camera, then the hallway, then his office. All feeds were crystal clear, and all had been viewed, repeatedly. Carter's posture shifted. This wasn't a neighbor prank anymore. It was criminal surveillance. Someone's been spying on you, Navarro said grimly. That's what I've been trying to say, Miles replied. They're not just on my network, they're in my home, digitally. He pulled up the IP logs showing access patterns. There were outbound requests, streams being sent to another location. Where are they sending this footage? Carter asked. Miles tapped through, tracing the signal. Looks like a local relay, not an external server. Which means whoever did this is close. Navarro straightened. Close as in? Miles turned toward the window. Same neighborhood. Maybe same block. Behind them, Karen gasped quietly. Her face had lost its usual HOA shade of righteous indignation. Now it was pale, unsettled. Wait, she said, voice shaky. Someone's been watching him? Through his own cameras? Miles turned, eyes meeting hers for the first time that day. And maybe watching others too. A silence fell like a curtain over the room. Because this wasn't just a data breach. It was a violation of the most sacred boundary of modern life, the illusion of privacy behind your own front door. Navarro muttered, "This just became a felony investigation." Karen looked out the window, suddenly unsure of what she had ever truly known about her neighbors or her own home. "I thought he was the problem," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Miles didn't respond. He was already scrolling, already digging deeper, already chasing the signal that had slithered its way into his life. And the deeper he went, the more certain he became of one terrifying truth. He wasn't the only one being watched. The air inside Miles's house had changed. What had started as a routine check, a misunderstood man trying to secure his Wi-Fi, had quickly mutated into something darker, more insidious. Officer Carter stood beside Miles, arms folded, eyes glued to the laptop screen as he continued pulling up device logs. And with every click, the horror widened. "These IPs here," Miles said, his voice low, controlled. "They're not mine. But the access times line up with my camera logs. Which means whoever this is, they're pulling feeds.
Not just from me."
Carter leaned in. "You're saying multiple homes?" "Exactly," he replied. "See the string? That's not my doorbell cam. It's not even my network. But my system flagged the signal coming through it. The intruder's bouncing data from house to house, hiding it in plain sight." Navarro, who had been making a call to dispatch for cybercrime support, turned back. "How many feeds are we talking?" Miles didn't answer. Instead, he clicked on a link. The screen flickered and then lit up with a live video. Not of his house. Of Karen Foster's living room. Time slowed. The image was clear. Too clear. A lace-curtained window. A couch with floral pillows. A glass bowl full of butterscotch candies on the side table. And in the frame, pacing back and forth like she often did when she was on the phone, was Karen. Earlier that day, Karen gasped audibly, one hand flying to her chest. That's my house," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "That's my home." Miles didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Karen stumbled back from the table like the laptop itself had struck her. Her mind raced. How long had someone been watching her? When she read at night. When she rearranged her medicine cabinet. When she argued with the HOA president about mailbox paint color. She felt sick. "I thought I was protecting the neighborhood," she muttered. "I thought he was the risk." Her eyes flicked to Miles, shame burning through the fear. He didn't gloat. He didn't sneer. He just stared at the screen, jaw clenched, focused. Like a man trying to plug a leak on a sinking ship. "This has to be someone nearby," Carter said, her voice tight with urgency. "Someone who knows the layout. The Wi-Fi names. The devices. This isn't random." "It's personal," Miles added. "They didn't just piggyback on my signal. They knew how to tunnel through the entire block." Navarro returned from the hallway, snapping his radio back onto his belt. "Cyber team's en route. But we need to trace that relay now." Karen spoke up, her voice hollow. "If they can see me, does that mean they've seen other homes too?" Miles nodded slowly. "That's the part that keeps me up at night." Karen turned toward the window, gazing out at the neighborhood she once saw as peaceful, manageable, hers to oversee. But now it felt different. Tainted. Every house had become a possible crime scene. Every smart TV, security cam, or baby monitor, a potential peephole for a faceless intruder. The irony twisted in her chest. She had spent years watching others, reporting suspicious behavior, measuring neighbors against her own invisible standards. But all the while someone had been watching her. All of them. No one knew who.
Or why.
But for the first time in her life, Karen Foster didn't feel like the one in control. She felt seen. And not in the way anyone ever wants to be. Miles's fingers flew across the keyboard like a man possessed. Lines of code, packets of data, IP logs. This wasn't just a casual dive into his network anymore. This was a hunt. A digital manhunt. And Miles, with Navarro and Carter watching closely behind him, was narrowing the target. The outbound signal, he muttered, eyes narrowed. It's bouncing, but not far. The relay's not external. It's local. How local? Navarro asked. Miles clicked again, tracing a chain of addresses and timestamps, matching them with signal strengths from his home's security mesh system. He cross-referenced neighborhood IP maps he'd built months ago, part of a side project to create a Wi-Fi heat map for fun. That fun had just turned into a smoking gun. Here. Miles pointed to the screen, the cursor blinking over a house icon. This is where the data's coming from. Carter leaned in. Navarro's eyes narrowed. Karen stepped closer and stopped cold. She stared at the screen, then at the address, then at Miles. No, she said, voice sharp. No, that's not possible. Miles didn't answer. Because the address on the screen, the source of the camera hijackings, the digital stalking, the invasive network breach was 148 Sycamore Lane. Her house. Karen's knees wobbled. There must be a mistake. That's my home. Navarro turned to her gently, but firmly. Karen, who else lives with you? She blinked, confusion slowly, giving way to dread. Just me and my nephew. Logan. The name hit the room like a dropped glass. Logan Foster.
22.
Dropped out of community college last fall. Moved in with Karen when things got tough. Said he just needed a place to get back on his feet. Quiet. Polite. Always in his room, headphones on, hunched over his laptop like it was a lifeline. Karen's voice cracked. Logan wouldn't, he's a good kid. He's smart. Tech-savvy, sure, but he wouldn't. Miles interrupted softly. He's smart enough to set up a spoofed network and piggyback onto other routers without raising suspicion. Karen shook her head violently.
No.
No, he couldn't have done this. But in her heart, something sank. All the late nights Logan had spent hunched at his desk. The way he always flinched when she walked into his room. The sharp way he guarded his laptop, like it was his most precious secret. He'd told her he was freelancing, building apps, learning cybersecurity. She thought he was turning his life around. Now she realized he might have just been getting better at hiding. I trusted him, Karen whispered, more to herself than anyone else. I defended him. Miles stepped away from the laptop, his tone steady but cold. That's what makes it work.
Trust.
That's how these people get close. Navarro's jaw was tight. We need to speak to him.
Now.
Karen stood frozen in place, her mouth moving but no sound coming out. Finally, she nodded once, woodenly. I'll take you, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Miles opened his mouth as if to object. He was the one who'd uncovered this, after all. But Navarro raised a hand. You stay here. Let us handle it. Miles nodded, jaw clenched. He didn't like standing still. But this wasn't over. As Karen turned toward her own home, leading the officers like a ghost trapped in her own nightmare, Miles watched her go, the final twist in a story that had started with suspicion and ended with betrayal. She had feared the man across the street, but the monster had been living under her own roof all along, and the shadows had been inside the house. The walk up the stairs felt longer than it should have. Karen's hand hovered over the banister as if it might burn her. Navarro and Carter followed close behind, silent but ready. Every creak in the old hardwood sounded like a verdict waiting to fall. At the end of the hallway stood a closed door. Logan's room. Always closed. Always locked from the inside. Always private. She used to think that was normal. Just a young man needing space. Now, it felt like walking up to the edge of a cliff. Navarro knocked sharply. Logan Foster? This is the police. We need to speak with you. No answer. Then movement. A chair scraping. Footsteps. The soft clunk of something being shoved into a drawer. Carter's hand hovered over her holster. Logan opened the door.
Now.
A pause. Then the knob turned.
Slowly.
Logan stood in the doorway, wiry, pale, with dark circles under his eyes and a faint scent of too much instant ramen lingering in the air. His hoodie hung loose on his frame, and his hands twitched nervously at his sides. He looked like a college kid who hadn't seen sunlight in a week, which, ironically, was probably true. "What's going on?" he asked, eyes darting from Navarro to Carter to his aunt, who stood rigid behind them like a statue carved from guilt. Navarro got to the point. "We have evidence that your device was used to breach multiple home networks in this neighborhood, including live access to security cameras." Logan blinked. "What?" "No, I don't know what you're talking about." Carter stepped forward. "Your MAC address, Logan. We traced the data. It originated from this room." Karen opened her mouth, but no words came. Her eyes begged him. "Tell me it's not true." Logan shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "It was just a joke," he said finally, his voice a whisper. At first, Navarro's tone hardened. "Watching people in their homes is not a joke. I didn't mean for it to go that far." Logan's voice cracked. I was bored. Everyone here is so fake. They pretend to be perfect. I wanted to see what was real." "You invaded their privacy," Carter said flatly. "You broke the law." Logan's shoulders slumped. "I know. I didn't mean to get hooked. But once I started, I couldn't stop. I watched them eat, argue, cry. It felt like I was part of their lives, even if they didn't know it." Karen's hand covered her mouth. "I felt invisible," Logan muttered. "Like no one even saw me anymore. You took me in, but you didn't really see me. You just needed someone to fill the extra room." His voice broke on that last word. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just didn't know how to feel anything. So I watched them feel." There was a long, aching silence. Logan looked down, ashamed. "I'm sorry, Aunt Karen. I didn't mean to bring this to your house." But the damage was done. Navarro stepped forward, calm but firm. "Logan Foster, you're under arrest for unlawful access to computer networks and unauthorized surveillance. You have the right to remain silent." As he read the Miranda rights, Karen turned away, unable to bear the sight of her nephew, her second chance at family, being cuffed like a criminal. But he wasn't a monster. He was a lonely kid, swallowed whole by a world more connected than ever and more isolated than any generation before him. A ghost in the machine, looking for meaning through a screen. And now, the screen had turned on him. The flashing red and blue lights outside cast distorted shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns of Willow Creek. Logan sat in the back of the squad car, wrists cuffed, head down.
He didn't resist. He didn't speak.
The screen had gone dark, and so had he. Karen Foster stood frozen on her porch, one trembling hand wrapped around the other, as if they could hold her together. Her knees felt like glass. Her throat, sandpaper. She couldn't stop watching the car, or the boy in the back seat. Her nephew. Her Logan. She'd taken him in after his parents gave up on him. Told herself she was giving him a second chance. Told the HOA he was a quiet genius. He was smart. Quiet too. But now, all she could hear in her mind was the sound of his voice cracking as he said, "I just wanted to feel something." A car door slammed. Navarro and Carter stepped back toward their cruiser. And then she saw him, Miles Bennett, still standing at the edge of the sidewalk, arms crossed, silent. Not smug. Not angry. Just tired. Karen swallowed hard, took one shaky step off the porch. Then another. Her heels clicked lightly on the pavement. She stopped a few feet away from him. "Miles," she began, her voice hoarse. I'm so sorry." He didn't move. Didn't look at her. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear, I didn't know what Logan was doing. I thought he was just figuring things out. And you?" Her words fell apart as tears welled in her eyes. "I called the police on you. And you were the one who uncovered it all. You protected us." Miles finally turned. His eyes didn't burn with rage. They didn't shine with pity either. They just held her there, quietly, firmly, as if weighing every word she had ever thrown into the world about him. He let the moment hang in the air, then said, simply, "I was out here changing my Wi-Fi password. And somehow, I was the one who got the cops called on me." Karen's breath caught in her throat. The sentence hit her harder than any shout ever could. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't rubbing it in. He was just telling the truth. And the truth was devastating. "I made assumptions," she whispered, tears falling freely now. "I saw what I wanted to see. And I was wrong." Miles nodded, slowly.
Yeah.
"You were."
Karen looked at the ground.
"I don't expect you to forgive me." He didn't respond for a moment. Then, "I don't need an apology," he said, voice steady but not unkind. "Just do better." It wasn't a dismissal. It wasn't even cold. It was something deeper, an offering, laced with pain but not poisoned by it. Karen nodded once, slowly. "I will." And with that, Miles turned and walked back to his house, quiet as ever. No grand finale. No dramatic speech. Just a man who had endured what he shouldn't have had to, and still chose dignity over bitterness. As Karen stood there in the fading light, she realized something she had never admitted before. Sometimes, the real measure of character isn't how loud someone speaks at a town hall meeting. It's how they act when they've been unjustly silenced. And forgiveness? Forgiveness wasn't a feeling.
It was a choice.
And for people like her, it was time to start making better ones. The clubhouse at Willow Creek had never seen so many laptops in one place. Rows of card tables, normally reserved for bingo night or HOA debates about mailbox color schemes, were now home to blinking modems, tangled Ethernet cables, and coffee-stained notebooks. At the front of the room stood Miles Bennett, hoodie sleeves pushed up, a simple slideshow glowing behind him that read, "How to Protect Your Digital Home, a Crash Course in Wi-Fi Security." He looked comfortable. Not because he loved being in front of people he didn't, but because he was doing something that mattered, something that would help. When the HOA reluctantly approved his proposal for a free cybersecurity workshop, they expected a couple of curious teenagers and maybe one overzealous dad. Instead, nearly the entire neighborhood showed up. People brought cookies. A woman brought a folding chair from her own kitchen. Someone even made flyers. And in the third row, sitting quietly with her hands folded in her lap, was Karen Foster. Not with her usual sharp gaze or pursed lips, but with something softer, humble, present. She listened intently as Miles explained how phishing scams work. She nodded along when he broke down how to name your router something other than your house number. She even chuckled, actually chuckled, when he made a joke about passwords that don't include 123. But mostly, she watched him with a kind of quiet gratitude that didn't need words. Because somewhere between that terrible afternoon and this hopeful evening, something had shifted. She no longer saw Miles as a stranger. She saw him as part of the neighborhood. After the session, Miles was packing up when she approached him. "Hey," Karen said gently, holding out a small envelope. "This came in the mail for you. From Logan." Miles took it surprised. "He wrote to me?" Karen nodded. "He asked me to make sure you got it." Miles sat down at the edge of the table, peeled the envelope open, and unfolded the single sheet of paper. The handwriting was messy, but familiar.
Sincere.
"Mr. Bennett, I know I don't deserve your time. I don't deserve kindness from anyone after what I did. But I wanted to say thank you. You didn't just catch me.
You stopped me.
You saw what no one else wanted to see, not even me. I thought watching people would make me feel less alone. But I see now I was hiding from being seen for real. I was scared of connection. You gave me a wake-up call I didn't even know I needed. Thank you for stopping me before I became someone who couldn't be saved. Logan." Miles read the letter twice, then folded it slowly, carefully, like something sacred. He didn't smile.
Not really.
But his shoulders eased, and something in his chest, something he hadn't realized was still clenched, finally let go. Karen watched him misty-eyed. "He's getting help," she said softly. "Real help." Miles nodded. "Good. He deserves that." She hesitated, then added, "We all do sometimes." He looked at her, and this time really saw her. Not as the woman who called the cops on him. Not as the nosy neighbor or the HOA hawk. But as someone who had the guts to show up, to face her mistakes, and to do better. Because in the end, understanding doesn't erase the past, but it can rewrite what comes next. And as the lights dimmed in the clubhouse and the neighbors trickled out, some waving, some asking for Miles's email, some just smiling shyly, Willow Creek didn't feel like a perfect neighborhood. It felt like a real one. A place where people got things wrong. And then, maybe if they were lucky and brave, they got the chance to make them right. At its heart, this story is about the fragile lines we draw between fear and understanding, between assumptions and truth, and how technology, when misunderstood or misused, can either connect us or destroy us. We're reminded that we must never judge others simply because they are different. Miles Bennett did nothing more than mind his own business. Quiet, reserved, and perfectly harmless, yet he became the target of suspicion simply because he didn't fit the mold. But the man feared for doing something suspicious turned out to be the one who saved the neighborhood from a real threat. His story challenges us to confront our own unconscious biases and to look beyond what we think we know. At the same time, the story is a powerful warning. Technology, without education or ethical guidance, becomes a trap. Logan Foster wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a lost, lonely young man who slipped into the shadows of the digital world, fueled by curiosity and isolation. What began as a joke turned into a dangerous addiction to control and surveillance. His fall was not about evil, it was about emptiness, and how easily the internet can become a substitute for connection when real human contact is missing. And then, there's the brutal irony. The person you suspect might be the one protecting you, and the one you trust could be hiding in the dark. Karen Foster believed she was safeguarding her neighborhood by calling the police. She trusted the boys she raised. But the real danger had been inside her home all along, while the man she doubted was the only one who saw the truth. Finally, the story teaches us that forgiveness is not easy, but it is the path to healing. Miles had every reason to stay bitter, to disappear back into the solitude that once protected him. But instead, he chose to show up, to teach, to help. Karen, full of shame and regret, could have turned inward. But she chose to listen. Even Logan, despite everything, found the courage to write a letter of apology, one that offered the smallest but most powerful thing: hope. This is not just a story about hackers and Wi-Fi. It's a story about being seen for who we are, about listening before we label, about using the very tools that divide us, technology, suspicion, fear, as bridges rather than weapons. Misunderstanding can break a community, but empathy and the courage to act on it can rebuild it. And sometimes, the quietest people among us are the ones who make the most noise when it truly matters.